I never imagined I would actually be living one of these Reddit stories. My family cut me out of the will, so I took the house scenarios, but the reality is terrifying and my hands are still shaking as I type this update. I walked quickly across the marble foyer of the manor while the sound of the locksmith drill echoed behind me like a warning siren. My heart was pounding against my ribs because I knew my stepmother and her spoiled son were probably already calling the police or their corrupt lawyer to try and break down my door. I needed to secure the premises immediately. The adrenaline was fading and leaving a cold dread in its place because I knew my victory at the law office was only the beginning of a much darker war. I checked the heavy oak doors and slid the deadbolts into place with a loud clack that finalized my ownership. I turned around to face the empty house that was finally mine. It smelled like stale perfume and greed. I remembered running through these halls as a child before my grandfather died and before my father let that woman take over everything. Subscribe for more shocking Reddit stories and comment below if you would have the guts to lock your family out of a mansion. I went straight to the library where the secret safe was hidden behind the portrait of the initial founder of our estate. I needed to know if my father had destroyed the original blueprints or if he had left anything else that could help me legally defend myself against the inevitable lawsuit. The room was dark and the air was thick with dust. I moved the painting and my fingers trembled as I dialed the combination my grandfather had whispered to me 2 decades ago. The mechanism clicked. The heavy steel door swung open. I expected to find cash or jewelry or maybe just empty shelves. Instead, I found a stack of documents that looked far too new to belong to my grandfather. On top of the stack was a handwritten letter from my late father dated just 3 days before he died. The handwriting was shaky and erratic. I picked it up and read the first line and my blood ran cold. It simply said that he knew what I was planning to do with the deed and that he had made sure that if I ever took this house I would lose my freedom along with it. I realized in that second that my father had not just been weak or manipulated but that he had actively hated me. I heard a car screech to a halt outside on the gravel driveway. I ran to the window and saw the lawyer's luxury sedan. He was not alone. He was with a private investigator I recognized from the local news. They were not here to negotiate. They were here to raid the house before I could find whatever was in the safe. I ducked below the windowsill as the lawyer started pounding on the front door with a force that rattled the frame. I could hear him screaming that I was trespassing and that he had a court order coming within the hour. I knew he was bluffing because courts do not move that fast, but his desperation terrified me. Why was a wealthy attorney risking his reputation by screaming like a maniac on a front porch? I looked back at the open safe and knew the answer had to be inside those documents. I grabbed the stack of papers and retreated to the heavy mahogany desk in the center of the room. I turned on the small reading lamp and ignored the shouting outside. The first folder I opened was thick and heavy. It contained bank statements, but they were not personal accounts. They were offshore accounts opened in my name. I scanned the dates and the transaction amounts. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had been moved through these accounts over the last 5 years. The dates perfectly matched times when I was out of the country for work or distracted with graduate school. It was a perfect setup. I turned the page and found a signed affidavit from my father claiming that I had coerced him into making these transfers. It was a lie. It was a complete fabrication designed to frame me for embezzlement and elder abuse. If this document saw the light of day, I would not just lose the house, I would go to federal prison for a decade. The pounding on the door stopped abruptly. The silence was worse than the noise. I heard the distinct sound of a key sliding into the back service entrance. My stomach dropped. I had changed the front locks, but in my haste I had forgotten that the lawyer had a master key to the servants' quarters which connected through the kitchen. I could hear footsteps moving rapidly across the tiled kitchen floor. They were inside. I was trapped in the library with the evidence that could ruin my life, and the people who wanted to destroy me were 30 seconds away from finding me. I looked around frantically for a place to hide the papers, but there was nowhere secure. I grabbed a heavy bronze statue from the desk to defend myself if necessary. The footsteps stopped just outside the library doors. I held my breath. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket with a text message from an unknown number. I glanced at the screen and the message chilled me to the bone. It said, "Do not let them in and check the blue envelope at the bottom of the safe right now." I stared at the phone screen in confusion, but the urgency of the situation forced me to act without thinking. I dropped the bronze statue and dove back toward the open safe. My hands scrambled through the remaining papers until I felt the texture of a thick blue envelope at the very bottom. I ripped it open just as the library door handle began to turn. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper with a medical logo on the header. It was a DNA paternity test. I scanned the results and my entire world stopped spinning. The test compared my DNA to my father's DNA and the result was a 0% match. My father was not my biological father. I felt a wave of nausea, but my eyes darted to the bottom of the page where a second sample had been tested for a match. The name on the second sample was Robert Vance. Robert Vance was the lawyer who was currently turning the handle of the library door. The result was a 99% match. The lawyer was my biological father. The door burst open and Robert Vance stood there with his chest heaving and sweat dripping down his forehead. He looked furious, but when his eyes landed on the blue paper in my hand his face went completely white. He froze in the doorway. The silence stretched for an eternity. I looked at the man who had helped my stepmother steal my inheritance and realized he was the man who gave me life. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind with violent force. My non-biological father had known. He had known for years that I was the product of an affair between his wife and his lawyer. That was why he hated me. That was why he framed me for embezzlement. He wanted to punish his lawyer and his unfaithful wife by destroying their son. I held up the paper and saw the recognition in Robert's eyes. He took a step back and raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. He whispered that he did not know I had that. I asked him if he knew about the embezzlement frame job. The look of genuine shock on his face told me the truth. He had been helping steal the house out of greed, but he did not know that the man he betrayed had set a trap to send his own son to prison. I threw the embezzlement ledger at his feet. I told him to look at what his client had done to his son. He picked up the ledger and flipped through the pages. I watched his professional demeanor crumble into horror. The stepmother ran into the room screaming for him to seize the papers, but Robert turned on her with a look of pure hatred. He roared at her to get out. He realized that she likely knew about the trap and had said nothing. The alliance between them shattered in an instant. The next hour was a blur of shouting and frantic phone calls. Robert Vance was a corrupt man, but he was also a narcissist who could not handle the idea that he had been played by a dead man. He looked at me with a strange mixture of guilt and calculation. He told me that he could make the embezzlement charges disappear. He said he knew where the original digital records were and he could prove the signatures were forged. He offered to destroy the stepmother in court and ensure my title to the house was ironclad. All he asked for in return was for me to keep the paternity test a secret so his own family and reputation would not be destroyed. I looked at this man who was technically my father. I felt absolutely no connection to him. I felt only disgust. But I was also pragmatic. I knew that fighting the embezzlement charge alone would bankrupt me and risk my freedom. I accepted his deal. I told him he had 24 hours to fix everything and get my stepmother off my property permanently. He nodded and walked out of the room, dragging my screaming stepmother with him. I watched from the window as they got into his car and drove away. I was finally alone in the house that was truly mine. I walked back to the safe and closed it. I realized that my grandfather must have known the truth too. That was why he gave me the deed directly. He knew my legal father would try to destroy me, and he knew my biological father was too corrupt to be trusted. He had given me the only weapon that mattered, which was ownership. I sat in the grandfather chair and looked around the library. I had the house. I had my freedom. I had destroyed my enemies. But I had also lost the last illusion I had about family. The man I mourned hated me, and the man who created me was a monster. I am going to sell this house. I cannot live here with these ghosts. I am going to take the money and start a new life far away from anyone who shares my DNA. Blood is not thicker than water. Blood is just a biological accident. Loyalty is the only thing that makes a family, and I am going to find my own family somewhere else. If you are fighting for an inheritance right now, just remember that the money is never worth the cost of your soul. Walk away before you find what is in the safe.